11 p.m. in the chilly Arizona desert, my laptop screen flashes my HOA dues jump from $80 to $250, effective next month. No reason, no vote, just a sneaky after-hours order. I'm Hal Mercer, a quiet banker living in Chandler. And the email I printed out with the yellow ink smeared on my finger is the only legal bullet I need. Can you guess what happens when the person who thinks he's in charge accidentally hands me the keys to his downfall? The desk lamp cast a small tired circle of light over my keyboard. Beyond it, the open window let in a thin breath of desert air, sharp with dust and the faint smell of irrigated lawns cooling under the stars. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago. Behind the monitor, the neighborhood group chat was pinging a scatter of short, half-angry bursts from people I could picture but not hear. I clicked print and listened to the slow warm-up of the machine, a faint whir followed by the soft thump of paper landing in the tray. Lifting the sheet, I uncapped a yellow highlighter and ran a careful line under the timestamp 11:03 p.m. My thumb caught a smear of neon ink. The stain was small but stubborn. On the top shelf, tucked between binders of tax records and an old college yearbook, sat the HOA bylaws. I pulled the plastic-covered binder down its spine, bent from years of being ignored. Tabs poked out in mismatched colors, edges curled like dried leaves. The pages crackled as I flipped to the financial section, scanning clauses until my finger paused on one in particular. Annual increase may not exceed 15% without a vote of the membership. The words were unambiguous. I read them twice, then set the open binder beside the printed email so the clause and the new fee could glare at each other. The group chat was still sparking pool repairs, landscaping upgrade insurance spike, but no one had details. I leaned back, letting the chair creak, and studied the quiet proof spread across my desk, the polite email, and the hard-edged bylaw. My own handwriting from years ago was penciled in the margin, 20% triggers audit rights. I couldn't remember the meeting where I'd written it, but I was grateful to whoever that earlier version of me had been. Outside, a sprinkler system hissed to life, and the air took on the damp scent of wet concrete. The glow from my monitor caught the dust motes in slow motion. I reached for my phone to snap a quick photo of the documents, together habit more than strategy, and saved it under the month and year. Then the quiet broke. My phone buzzed, not the group chat this time, but a new thread. The preview showed a name I recognized and a line that changed the room's temperature. Marlene wants to meet you tomorrow morning. Says it's urgent. I watched the cursor blink in the reply field, steady as a heartbeat, and wondered how early was too early to start asking the kinds of questions that don't go away. The morning sun was already harsh, slicing into the cafe through its wide front windows, drawing hard-edged shadows across the table where Marlene Kersey sat waiting. Her navy blazer didn't have a single wrinkle, the gold pin on the lapel catching the light like it was in on the conversation. She smiled when she saw me, but it was the kind of smile that barely reached the eyes Polite practiced and possibly rehearsed in the car mirror on the way over. I ordered a black coffee and slid a couple of bills toward the register. When I reached for my wallet, the corner of my bank employee badge slipped into view. I caught her glance, quick, precise, as it landed on the photo ID before she looked away. The cashier handed me my change, and I carried the cups to the table, steam curling up between us like a cautious mediator. "How?" she began, fingers wrapped neatly around her mug. "I know the email probably came as a surprise." "Surprise is one word for it," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's for the community's long-term benefit," she continued, tapping one polished fingernail against the tabletop with each syllable of long-term. "We've been planning certain improvements, and costs are what they are these days." Her vagueness was almost artful. I asked for specifics, but her answers floated just out of reach, like trying to catch steam. She mentioned infrastructure upgrades without naming a single thing that would actually be upgraded. I sipped my coffee, letting the cinnamon roll smell from the counter fill the pauses. A low hiss from the espresso machine punctuated the moment before Hank Miller appeared at my elbow, baseball cap in hand. "Morning," he said with the rasp of someone who'd inhaled more smoke than air in his career. "You talking about that dues thing?" Marlene's smile tightened by a fraction. "We're discussing it, yes." Hank pulled out a chair and sat without asking. "We had an emergency increase like this years back," he said. "Promised a new gym and better lighting for the park. Got neither. Money went somewhere." He shrugged, but his eyes stayed on her steady. "That was before my tenure," Marlene replied smoothly. "I can't speak to decisions made then." She didn't look at me when she said it, but I felt the weight of the sentence landing in my direction, as if I was being asked to accept that history had nothing to do with the present. Hank finished his coffee in 2 gulps, muttered something about yard work, and left. The bell over the door chimed in his wake, letting in a brief rush of dry air and traffic noise. Marlene leaned forward, then her voice softening to a kind of calculated warmth. "As a banker, you understand money better than anyone here," she said. "You know these things can't always be explained in black and white." The words slid across the table like a card she expected me to pick up. I set my cup down slowly, aware that she had just told me 2 things she'd noticed the badge and she believed that put me on her side. We made a little more small talk about the weather, about the new family in Lot 17, but the meeting was already over in spirit. She had delivered her message and I had filed it away under pressure points. Back home, the quiet felt heavier than usual. I sat at my desk and opened the email from the night before, pulling up the full header again. There it was, 11:03 p.m., well after HOA office hours. No way to claim it was an automated system firing off notices at random. This was a choice time to slip under the door of everyone's attention just before bed. I was still staring at the screen when a floorboard creaked somewhere down the hall. The sound was sharp in the stillness, the kind of noise that could be explained by settling wood, or by someone standing very still, deciding whether to knock. By mid-morning, Castile's diner had settled into its dependable rhythm spatulas, clicking against the flat top a bell, dinging every few minutes the smell of frying bacon braided with burnt toast and orange zest. Byron Castile was already in our usual booth when I walked in, a slice of light cutting across his shoulder where the blinds never quite closed. His coffee was half gone and coal black. The man treats cream like an insult. "Hal," he said without looking up, "you brought it." I slid into the booth and set the sun-faded binder on the table between us. The plastic cover was scuffed, the edges feathered from too many moves and too few readings. When I cracked it open, the spine made a small, papery sigh. The waitress, Darla, who's been here long enough to remember prices with a 3 in front, set down another mug for me and topped off Byron's without asking. 2 booths over, Jenna angled her laptop like a shield and pretended to study torts. Her hair was pulled into a low knot that said, "I'm serious," but the way her eyes kept lifting over the screen said, "I'm listening." Byron pulled the binder closer, turning pages with the same economy he used to turn budgets. "Financial section," he murmured, as if calling a play. His finger tracked down the columns of clauses until it stopped. There he said, tapping a line with the blunt end of his pen. 8.4. I leaned in. Annual increase may not exceed 15% without a vote of the membership. Below it, in smaller print that looked like an afterthought, sat the sentence I'd remembered but never really needed before. If increases exceed 20%, any resident may petition for an independent financial audit at the association's expense. Byron circled that second sentence, the pen etching a thin groove into the paper. A wet ring from his coffee mug pressed an imperfect halo over the text. "They went triple, didn't they?" "They did," I said. "At 11:03 p.m. He snorted once, a short sound that might have been laughter in a different decade. "After hours courage," he said. "Classic." Darla slid a plate of eggs between us, uninvited, but not unwelcome. Tilda shuffled in a minute later, kissed Byron on the temple, and stole a triangle of his toast with the reflex of a long marriage. "You boys rebuilding Rome?" she asked, smiling at me over her readers. "Just the cul-de-sac," Byron said. Jenna abandoned the pretense and crossed to our booth, perching on the edge. "If there's an audit trigger," she said, tapping the circled sentence with a careful fingernail, "what do we need to pull it?" "Read the fine print," Byron answered. "Petition signed by 10% of members or any unit owner depending on bylaws version. Looks like any owner will do here." He flipped a page to check the adoption date and the notarized seal. "This is the 2016 revision. You're in luck." Luck isn't what I'd call it, but I nodded. Jenna lifted her laptop fingers, already moving. "I'll start archiving HOA emails from the last 3 years," she said. "Thread them by subject tag anything that references assessment, emergency, or reserve. I can scrape the attachments and dump them into a drive." "You two are dangerous," Tilda said, amused, then leaned back as the jukebox across the room made its familiar hollow clink. Someone dropping in a quarter that would never return music. The machine hasn't worked since 2005, but hope is a habit in small places. Byron angled the binder so the light fell cleanly on the margin. "They'll try to call this an emergency assessment," he said. "The trick is proving it wasn't handled under the rules. No notice, no vote, no proper scope. Show me a real emergency that waits until 11 at night to make itself known." I took a slow drink of coffee. The bitterness woke up the back of my tongue. What do I ask for first? "Budget to actuals for the past 2 fiscal years," he said, counting on his fingers. "Reserve study, vendor contracts, minutes from any board meeting where increases were discussed." And because I enjoy watching bullies forget the alphabet detailed invoice lists with vendor names unredacted. I wrote it down, not because I'd forget, but because ink has a way of making stubborn thoughts behave. Jenna was already emailing herself a to-do list. Tilda slid the salt toward me with 2 fingers. "You'll be polite?" she asked. It wasn't a question. "I always am," I said. Polite is not the same as soft. Byron traced the ring his coffee had left as if measuring it. "They've handed you the rope, Hal," he said, leaning back until the vinyl protested. "Now you just need to pull. Slow is fine. Steady is better." In the kitchen, a timer rang. Darla hustled past with a tray of pancakes that smelled like Sundays used to. Outside the window, a dust devil flicked across the parking lot and unspooled just as quickly. I thought about the email's timestamp the triple jump the way Marlene's eyes had flicked to my badge. We were past neighborly confusion now. We were in the territory where paper saves time later. Jenna nudged the binder toward me. "I'll start a shared folder," she said. "Every HOA email gets downloaded attachments too. I'll name them by date and subject line. If there are patterns, they'll surface." Byron tapped his pen against the circled clause. "Patterns always surface. People who play cute with money think numbers are fog. Numbers are granite." Darla refilled our cups. "On the house," she said. "For the Rome project." When we finally stood, the booth's cushion exhaled with relief. Tilda tucked the toast triangle into Byron's napkin as if she could sneak him calories. Jenna hugged me in that quick adult way that both apologizes for and insists on affection. I slid the binder back into its plastic coat and felt the ridiculous comfort of its weight. Some people carry worry stones. Auditors carry paper. Outside, the light was white and sharp. Heat doesn't wait in Arizona, it shows up early and stays until it's asked to leave. I drove home with the windows cracked just enough to move the airmind already making list signatures to gather phrases to avoid in emails, questions to ask Elias that he could answer without breaking loyalty or law. At my desk, I set the binder beside last night's printout. Coffee rings met highlighter smears like they'd been introduced. I opened my inbox to draft a request for documents, and before I could finish the salutation, my phone buzzed against the wood. A new notice slid across the lock screen. "Update automatic withdrawals for new dues will begin next week. Please ensure sufficient funds are available." The cheery tone did not match the tightening in my chest. I stared at the message until the letters lost their edges. Somewhere in the house, the AC kicked on with a mechanical sigh and the blinds ticked against the sill in the manufactured breeze. I set the phone down, screen still lit. If Byron was right, and he usually is, this wasn't a sprint. It was a tug, hand over hand, until whatever was on the other end moved. I reached for a pen and wrote the word audit at the top of a fresh page. The phone buzzed again, insistent, as if the next week had already arrived and intended to be counted. Near midnight, the house settled into that small hum it keeps for itself, air conditioner, breathing in measured intervals, the refrigerator clicking once like a metronome that lost its beat. In my office, 2 monitors painted the room a soft aquarium blue. 3 windows glowed side by side, a portal to HOA bank records I'd compiled from member disclosures and prior mailers, the state's vendor registry with its patient columns of ownership data, and my growing email archive subject line stacked like shingles, dates marching backward toward a quieter time. Above the desk, the printed fee hike notice was pinned by a brass thumbtack. The neon strip I'd drawn under 11:03 p.m. hadn't faded. It looked like a warning flare that refused to burn out. Jenna patted in barefoot hair-up laptop under her arm. "I made a folder for every month," she said, dropping into the chair beside me. "If they reused boilerplate language in past notices, we'll spot it." "Good," I said. "Let's see what the money says." I opened the vendor registry first. Arizona keeps decent public files for corporations and LLCs. Not all stories want to be told, but many of them are printed and notarized anyway. Using my bank badge number to pass through a portal of public corporate filings wasn't a trick. Just a faster front door, but my thumb still hesitated against the keys out of old habit. The page loaded ownership statements, agent names, filing dates. I searched Desert Crest Landscaping LLC and let the cursor spin while the system considered. The result blinked onto the screen with the bureaucratic calm of a traffic light turning green. Registered agent Kersey Rowan. Mailing address 3 miles from our neighborhood. A second tab showed municipal permits for decorative hardscape at a residential property that, when I traced the parcel ID, matched Marlene's street. I took a breath and let it out slow. Numbers don't accuse, They just stand where you put them until someone looks. On the other monitor, I lined up the HOA's approved budget alongside the year-to-date actuals 2 PDFs shoulder to shoulder like mismatched twins. Jenna leaned in the glow, lighting her face. Here, she said, tapping the landscaping row with a nail painted a chipped pale blue. Approved, $48,000. Actuals, $71. Notes, column says storm remediation, I murmured. We didn't have a storm that size, not unless it targeted 1 yard, she said. I printed the 2 pages. The laser coughed warm paper sliding into the tray with a leathery whisper. I circled the discrepancy in red, then drew arrows between the vendor name and desert crest. On a yellow legal pad, I wrote possible conflict of interest and underlined possible until the paper thinned. Audit teaches you 2 reliances: skepticism and the spine, to leave adjectives out until you've earned them. My phone buzzed the vibration a small, nervous animal skittering across the desk. Unknown number, local exchange. I waited through 2 rings, then picked up. Hal, a man's voice said low enough that I imagined a hand cupped around the speaker. It's Elias. I pictured Elias's careful hair and the way he always smoothed the corners of forms as if paper could feel embarrassment. Evening, I said. Or morning, depending how you count. A small breath, then I shouldn't be calling. In the background, I could hear the faint rhythmic beep of a microwave or a timer left running. I can't say it out loud. You don't have to, I said. I'm staring at 2 columns that don't like each other. Another breath. Some invoices were marked priority. I didn't mark them. I can't. He stopped, then chose a safer sentence. Check the approvals. Look at who signed. We'll need to see the unredacted versions, I said. Resident right to request. By law. Silence, and then the audible swallow of a person deciding which hill to live on. I'm going to send you the dates you should ask for, he said, publicly. So, there's a record. Don't say I gave them to you. I won't, I said. And Elias. Thank you, I said, not for the information, but for the angle of his courage. The line clicked. He was gone before gratitude could become liability. Jenna exhaled. He's stuck. We'll give him a way not to be, I said. We kept at it another hour. I printed side-by-side comparisons stapled with the neat violence of a tool designed to make stacks obey. In the margins, my pen scratched notes I'd understand later: vendor tie-out reserve dip approval matrix. Jenna moved through email chains like a miner with a reliable headlamp saving attachments, renaming them 2022-04 Landscaping Proposal, PDF 2022-05 Assessment Draft.ducux. On the wall clock, the second hand crawled past midnight and refused to apologize. When the stack grew thick enough to feel like something, I headed to the 24-hour print shop 2 blocks away for clean copies on heavier stock. The night clerk, a kid with earbuds and a thoughtful patience I appreciated, fed my files into a machine that hummed like a well-fed cat. Thermal paper from the receipt printer curled at the edges as it fell into my palm. It always looks like something trying to roll itself into the past. I paid in cash out of old superstition. As I slid my wallet back into my pocket, my bank badge slipped loose and hit the counter with a soft click. It's a nothing sound, unless you work around money for a living. Then it's a bell. I caught it on the first bounce, but not before the clerk's eyes, no, not the clerk's, Elias's eyes appearing from behind the end cap of copy paper, like he'd stepped out of a shadow, landed on it. He hadn't seen me when he came in. He blinked, then glanced at the door as if calculating which exit would make fewer words. We stood 3 feet apart with a rack of staplers between us, 2 men holding the edges of a conversation neither of us could afford to finish. Evening, I said, keeping it regular as aspirin. He nodded once. His gaze dropped to the badge, then up to my face, and stayed there long enough to register understanding and worry. Paper jams, more at night, he said to the clerk, voice steadying. Let me show you a trick. He rounded the counter to point at a lever that did not need pointing at. As he did, his shoulder brushed mine just enough to pass a folded receipt into my palm. I didn't look at it. He didn't look at me. The clerk thanked him, and Elias told a story about Toner as if the fate of Toner mattered. Back home, I emptied my pockets onto the desk. The folded receipt contained a short list of dates and 4-digit numbers that looked like shorthand until I matched them to invoice IDs in my stack. My pen began its small, satisfying work, possible fraud in the margin. Not because I needed dramatic words, but because ink is a way to brace a thing before it slides. Jenna had left a sticky note on my keyboard, sleep. She'd also left a row of color-coded tabs marking places where emails and invoices shook hands. I smiled, despite myself. Quiet heroics don't clap. They file. I started drafting the document request to the HOA's general inbox budget to actuals reserve study board minutes, vendor contracts, unredacted invoices. I kept the tone neutral and the verbs housebroken. The clock ticked toward 1. Before I hit send, a red bubble pulsed in the corner of my screen. New email. Community meeting agenda. I clicked and watched the PDF open. The agenda title sat in a font that tries too hard to be friendly. The last item was a single line centered like a DARE assessment update. Somewhere in the house, a floor vent breathed, and the pinned printout above my desk wavered slightly in the manufactured breeze as if the paper itself had something to say and was working up the courage. The ceiling fans in the community center turned in slow, lazy arcs, pushing warm air from one corner of the hall to the other. It was early summer in Chandler, the kind of heat that pressed on your skin even indoors. I lugged my small projector to the folding table at the front, the cord snaking down toward an outlet that had probably been there since the building opened. Residents filled the folding chairs, knees brushing the smell of overbrewed coffee, mingling with floor cleaner. On the corkboard beside the podium, the evening's agenda was written in a deliberate hand: assessment, update, budget review, and tucked at the bottom, new landscaping contract. I'd seen enough agendas to know that was code. I clicked the projector on. The white canvas screen blinked to life, humming faintly. "Let's start here," I said, voice steady. The first slide appeared, the fee hike email, its subject line in bold. I tapped a key, and Clause 8.4 from the HOA bylaws filled the other half of the screen. The bylaws, I said, state annual increases may not exceed 15% without a resident-approved vote. What we received, I pointed at the timestamp, was an increase of exactly 200% sent at 11:03 p.m. after office hours. The murmurs started in the middle rows and spread outward. I let it run because murmurs have a way of softening the ground before you plant a fact. Marlene sat at the center of the board table, her blazer as precise as it had been in the cafe. She didn't interrupt, but her fingers tapped the gavel base, slow, controlled. I switched slides to a side-by-side comparison: budget versus actuals. These numbers, I said, don't match the allocations approved by the community. I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't have to. The discrepancy glowed in red on the wall. In the back, Elias shifted in his chair. I wasn't sure if he'd speak, but then he stood. His hand trembled slightly as he placed a stack of invoices onto the front table. Thick, black redacted stamps cut across lines of text. The sound of paper hitting wood carried more than I expected. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Why would they redact vendor names?" I didn't answer. I simply advanced to the next slide where the vendor names appeared unredacted from public filings. Desert Crest Landscaping, LLC. I read aloud. Registered Agent Rowan Kersey. I didn't add the relation. Everyone here already knew. A wave of shifting bodies moved through the chairs. Marlene's face tightened in slow motion. She brought the gavel down hard. Meeting adjourned, she said, each word clipped. The room didn't empty right away. Residents stayed in their seats, talking in knots, glancing between the board table and the screen still glowing at the front. I began packing my projector, coiling the cord into practiced loops. Byron came up beside me, his hand on the back of my chair. "She's cornered now," he murmured low enough that only I heard. "Expect her to push back harder." I slid the projector into its case, the last slide still frozen on the screen, a clause from the bylaws underlined in red. Out in the hallway, voices overlapped in urgent, whispered tones. Somewhere behind me, the gavel thudded against wood one last time as if to reclaim the silence. Maricopa County's civil courtroom had the old careful smell of paper and ink, like a library that took sides. The wood-paneled walls gleamed under recessed lights. A wall clock ticked with the unbothered pace of a patient teacher. When our case was called, a soft shuffle of shoes and a throat being cleared were the only sounds besides that clock. Byron stepped up first. He carried the original HOA bylaws like a small, stubborn relic, the notary seal on the 2016 revision dulled to the color of old brass. He didn't grandstand. He just raised the binder enough for the judge to see the seal opened to Clause 8.4 and rested one finger on the line that had become our backbone. Annual increase may not exceed 15% without a vote of the membership. He did not look at Marlene. He did not look at me. He looked at the sentence as if it were a straight edge. Across counsel table, the HOA attorney flipped through his yellow legal pad. In the margin, in hurried block letters, I could make out emergency assessment, a phrase he underlined twice like it could be willed into retroactive truth. My turn. I walked the judge through the set of exhibits I'd tabbed with blue flags, annotated bank statements listing payments to Desert Crest Landscaping. The vendor registration showing Rowan Kersey as registered agent, the automatic withdrawal notice announcing that the triple dues would begin siphoning from residents' accounts next week. I kept my voice even and let the paper do its work. The judge leaned forward when the vendor registry appeared on the screen. Public records have a way of quieting rooms. When was this fee increase sent, the judge asked. 11:03 p.m. Your Honor, I said. The email header reflects after-hours distribution. Was there a vote? No, Your Honor. The attorney for the HOA cleared his throat and started into the speech he'd prepared. Costs had risen. Storms had damaged common areas. The board had a duty to act swiftly. He used emergency assessment like a bandage and kept pressing it to the wound. The judge listened, then turned his head in that small decisive motion judges use when they are finished listening. Ms. Kersey, he said, addressing Marlene directly. Do you have the proof of 2/3 resident approval for this increase? Silence. Paper rustled somewhere behind us as a resident shifted a stack of forms on her lap. Marlene's jaw worked once, then set. We proceeded under emergency authority, she said carefully, as if each word had to be weighed before it could leave her mouth. Emergency or not, the judge replied, your bylaws and the law require specific procedures to be followed. I see no evidence those procedures were followed. Byron, still at the edge of the witness stand, kept his finger on the clause as if it were a pulse he was monitoring. I felt the odd familiar calm that comes when a number finally adds up and there's no more arguing to be done. I moved to the final exhibit, a side-by-side of the approved budget and actual spending red circles around the landscaping overages. The payments to Desert Crest, he said, began increasing months before this so-called emergency. The vendor is owned by Ms. Kersey's brother. Residents were never given unredacted invoices despite repeated requests. The judge looked down at the motion on his desk, then up at us, then back down. The stamp appeared from the right-hand drawer with a small mechanical clack. He brought it down with crisp finality. The sound rubber finding paper was louder than I expected. Granted, he said, and the word was echoed in ink. The association's accounts are frozen effective immediately. Expenditures are limited to essential maintenance until completion of an independent audit which this court now orders. The audit scope will include vendor relationships, contract approvals, and compliance with notice and voting requirements. Behind me, someone exhaled like they'd been holding their breath all summer. Another resident's chair leg squeaked on the tile. Byron closed the binder gently, the paper whispering as it met itself. He gave the notary seal a brief, almost affectionate tap with his thumb, then stepped down. The HOA attorney asked for clarification, his voice already smaller. Could the court consider a carve-out for upcoming landscape enhancements? The judge didn't bother hiding his expression. Essential maintenance only, he said. Enhancements can wait for daylight. We gathered our exhibits. The blue flags stuck out at neat angles. The spreadsheets lay flat, their red circles no longer theoretical. I slid the automatic withdrawal notice back into its plastic sleeve, thinking how quickly polite emails become evidence when they're printed. In the hallway, the air felt cooler, as if the building's lungs had decided to take a deeper breath. Residents clustered in low voices, not quite ready to be loud. Byron adjusted his cuffs and looked pleased in the way a man looks pleased when a carpenter's square proves a corner true. Granite, he said under his breath like he was toasting the concept. Marlene came through the door moments later, her heels clicking evenly on the tile. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She turned just enough to let her eyes meet mine. There was no shock in them, no apology, only an assessment fast and clinical of the next wall she'd try to climb. Her lips pressed into a line so thin it might have been drawn with a ruler. Then she walked on the legal pad tucked under her arm like a shield she still believed would hold. The wall clock in the hallway ticked once decisively. I slipped the bylaws into my briefcase, felt the ridge of the seal under the plastic, and thought of the frozen accounts, a hush falling over ledgers that had been busy for all the wrong reasons. Outside, the sun was white on the courthouse steps. My phone buzzed a local reporter asking for a comment, and then before I could answer another message from Jenna Audit Timeline, I'll start a checklist. I typed back, soon. We got the order. Then I put the phone away and stood for a moment in the doorway, letting the light find its level on the floor. The Chandler Tribune didn't often run HOA news above the fold, but there I was on Saturday's front page squinting in the desert sun, my bank badge clipped to my shirt pocket. The headline, Court freezes HOA funds sat above the photo like a verdict carved in stone. At the market, I caught strangers glancing from the paper to me, their expressions split between curiosity and approval. Down at the playground, the swing chain swayed idly in the breeze, though the seats hadn't moved in days. The gates were locked, and a laminated under-review sign hung from a length of yellow caution tape. Kids clustered on the sidewalk with scooters and basketballs. Parents leaned against the fence talking in low voices. Beyond them, Marlene's prized flower beds looked too perfect, each petal arranged like it had signed a contract. Someone had looped caution tape around the beds, too, whether as protest or preservation I couldn't tell. Elias met me by the fence, manila envelope under his arm. He slid out a notarized statement, the black ink still smelling faintly of toner. "Playground funds," he said, tapping the page. "Rerouted to landscaping invoices, all signed off by Marlene." His voice carried no triumph, only the fatigue of someone who'd tried to wave a flag months ago. I read the line item breakdown, saw the familiar vendor name, and nodded. Byron and Tilda arrived with a thermos of coffee, the steam curling into the dry air. We set paper cups along the top of the fence while parents drifted over. What began as an update on essential services, trash collection schedules, irrigation repairs slid naturally into talk of the special election. Someone mentioned fresh flyers on the bulletin board, "Vote for your new board, 2 weeks." Faces turned toward each other, calculating who might run, who might have the patience for meetings and budgets. The audit team, 2 quiet professionals in rolled-up sleeves, moved between the clubhouse and their rented van carrying boxes stamped HOA. Confidential. One paused long enough to murmur to me about a consulting payment that didn't make sense, a sum large enough to repaint every fence in the subdivision twice over. The rest of their findings they kept sealed behind neutral expressions, but the weight in their tone hinted at more to come. By midweek, the informal chatter hardened into resolve. We gathered in the community center under humming fluorescents, the folding chairs arranged in uneven rows. Ballots were counted at a side table, the scrape of pen on paper louder than the air conditioner. When the results were read, Marlene officially removed from the board, there was no applause, only a collective exhale, as if the entire room had been holding its breath since spring. The oversight committee was appointed on the spot, Elias for finance, Tilda for amenities, and 3 others who had the respect of their streets. I agreed to serve as an interim advisor until the audit was complete, though the title felt less important than simply keeping the lights on and the water flowing. As we filtered out into the cooling evening, one of the auditors caught my arm. "Hal," she said quietly, "there's a chance we can recover some of those diverted funds. Maybe more than a chance. If residents approve, we'll pursue restitution." Her gaze held mine for a beat, and I felt the subtle shift eyes turning toward me, waiting to see if I'd nod, speak lead. In the distance, the swings clinked against their chains in the wind. I looked past the caution tape at the empty playground, then back at the neighbors gathered in loose circles, their voices rising with new plans. "Let's see the final numbers," I said. "Then we'll decide together." The tape around Marlene's flowers fluttered once, catching the last light of the day, as if even the petals knew the ground beneath them was no longer hers to shape. The spring breeze was light enough to lift the corners of the new playground sign, its bold letters still smelling faintly of fresh paint. Financials posted monthly. Beyond it, the swings were in full use. Laughter cutting through the morning air, and the orange blossoms along the fence added a sweetness that hadn't been here last year. The yellow caution tape was gone. The ground felt lighter underfoot. Under the pavilion, folding tables were set in a neat rectangle, pitchers of lemonade sweating in the mild sun. Byron stood beside me at the projector screen, flipping through slides with the ease of someone who'd spent half his life in boardrooms. Jenna moved between tables, handing out neat stacks of freshly printed bylaws, their covers stamped with a new clause in bold. Any fee increase requires a resident vote and 30-day public posting. Welcome to HOA Finance 101. I began clicking to the first slide, a simple table showing last quarter's income and expenses. This isn't just about numbers, it's about trust. And trust is earned, not assumed. The room neighbors the new board, a handful of curious teens sat forward in their chairs. Byron took over, walking them through how to request an audit, how to read a budget without falling asleep, and why red ink should never be shrugged off as just a timing issue. We passed around templates for budget tracking and audit requests, each page carrying both paper and QR code versions. Near the community hall's front door, the new lockbox gleamed, a modest steel rectangle with a clear label, Monthly Financials. I watched as people dropped in envelopes for the first time, some with questions, others with suggestions for the next board meeting. When it came time to vote on the amendment, the board barely hesitated. All in favor, the chair asked. Every hand went up, including mine. The applause that followed filled the pavilion, not loud so much as solid, like a collective nod that something real had shifted. Afterward, Jenna helped me pin the first monthly financial summary to the bulletin board beside the playground gate. A breeze tugged at the top edge until I pressed the thumbtack deeper into the cork. Behind me, a neighbor's voice floated over the hum of kids and the clink of lemonade cups. "Should have done this years ago," she said. Not bitter, just certain. I stepped back, letting the paper sit square under the new sign. The swing chains clinked in a rhythm that felt like breathing. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about who was watching the money. Everyone was, and that was the best fence we could build. By late afternoon, the lockbox outside the hall clicked shut with a satisfying finality, its paint no longer fresh but steady under my hand. The same bylaws that once gathered dust now sat open on the table inside, creased from use, not neglect. Justice, I've learned, isn't loud. It's steady, and it takes root when more than one set of eyes keeps watch. Sometimes fences aren't meant to keep people out, they're meant to remind us what's worth protecting together. If you've ever found a second chance hiding inside a problem you didn't want, I'd like to hear how you spotted it.